Hello. I did in fact Google easy recipe earlier. I noticed a little micro interaction that I have never seen before on Google's recipe results, which is this cute little hover state for popular recipes. And I wanted to see if I could hop into Figma and make this little interaction. So let's go. I did a tiny bit of pre-work, which was to go into the inspector and get the actual sizes for some of this stuff. I don't want to screen share going through the inspector because it's messy and you just get to see me clicking around and staring at code and pretending I understand everything when only I understand a few things. But what we did get is that the default size here is 150 by 286. The hover size is 222 by 286. And so that will be the starting point as a reference for sizing for these frames and will help us suss out the spacing for a number of things. I also grabbed some of the text and then some screenshots of both versions of the card just to set us up for success here in the file. So to get started, anytime I build a component, a card component, any component really here in Figma, I start by creating placeholders for pretty much everything I see, just so that I can visualize where everything's going to go and space it all out. So we'll start with a frame here. We'll make it 150 by 150 since we know this is 150 wide. And that looks like a square to me. We'll round those corners and call this image placeholder. Past that image, we've got a couple different text fields here. We've got a name of the recipe. We've got a source. We've got a numeric rating, a number of ratings, and then some ingredients, you know. And then let's see if my emoji keyboard opens. Yeah, 25 minutes. Last thing we have here are some stars, which we have a handy dandy star tool here. Let's duplicate that, put it in a frame, name the frame, and put a nice goldenrod color on those. My favorite crayon, hopefully yours too. And they're looking a little sharp, so we might as well give those just the tiniest bit of rounding to make them a bit friendlier for our eyes. And let's make 5. Let's see. Stars are a little small next to the text, so we'll bump them up maybe to 14 by 14. And then we need to control some spacing here, and that's what auto layout is all about, controlling spacing, which is easy enough with this one. We've just got everything in a big vertical line, which is a vertical flex, but we do have these review components all linked together horizontally, so we'll start there by selecting each of those, pressing Shift A to make a new frame, and then naming that reviews. And they do not need to be that far apart. There we go. And now that that is in a horizontal auto layout, we can select all of the text here and put it in a vertical one. So Shift A again to make a new frame, rename that something like content. Great. Let's do some spacing work, maybe about 4 between those. And then the title here is a bit bigger, so let's bump that up a few, just a little bit though. Give it a bit of a bigger line spacing too, and make it a nice blue. Classic default link color. We do know that it can be 2 lines. I have a feeling it can't be any more than 2, so let's put the actual name of this recipe in here. And with the text selected, we can open the additional text menu and truncate that text after 2 lines. We do not want it to be any longer than that. And you'll see actually what happens. Let's select our content and our image placeholder now and add another instance of auto layout. We can rename this one and call it card because that's what we're making. While we're in here, let's call it card/default. This naming convention will name the variants of our component that we're going to make later on. So it's always useful to start that naming convention early on, and I'll show you a little bit more about that as we create the hover state. But you can see our text is taking up a lot of space, which is not what we want. We want this frame to have a max width of 150, or a fixed width of 150, I should say. And we want everything in it to fill that, and everything in the content frame to fill that, and that's going to bump that title down onto those two lines. You can see now if this title got any longer, it would truncate after those two lines, so it would just sort of dot 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 out into infinity there. And then we do not need this much space, but we can give it a little bit of room on the top and bottom here in the content. And that has given us that 286 that we were looking for, which I love to see. But let's put a little bit of hierarchy on this text. And we can do that by adding this gray to these two bottom elements. Get them away from pure black. And I suppose while we're in here, this is probably not all zeros either. So let's see what Google is using for black these days. Great. While I was zoomed in, it does look like there's a small gray border on this image. So let's give it a stroke of 1 and get that light gray. Awesome. And there might be some weight stuff with the font here, but I don't really want to get too deep into that. So we'll leave this as is for now and make a copy and change that name from card default to card hover. That's going to be our second component state. We know that we want this one to be 222 wide. And because we did all of that fill container work with the elements in the default card, you can see that that has resized nicely for us. We can go ahead and actually fix the width or fix the height to 286 for both of these cards, just to keep them consistent and force them to stay consistent. And then beyond width, what has changed between these two cards? The ratings have gone away, the reviews have gone away, and the ingredient number and time have been replaced with an actual list of ingredients. So I grabbed this text from Google earlier. We can go ahead and just replace this, because it is in that gray color as well. Control-Shift-V to replace with the styles intact, and then we'll get rid of that. And so that is the look of the hover card. With both of these cards done, we can select them together and then create a component set. And that's where you'll see what happened with those slash names. Once we open card here, you can see we have the hover and default states already named. We just have to name the property itself, and let's call it state. And then from here, there's a couple of things we can do to make this a little bit more of a slick component. We can add some text properties to it, and Figma's actually made this a little easier to do after you've created a variant than it used to be. Instead of having to select this and then select that, we can use the newest feature. Well, I guess it might not be the newest feature anymore. Config is coming up, and who knows what Figma will have released between now and then. But we can use multi-select to grab both the title components here, and that was Command Option A on a Mac. And with both of these selected, we can go back over into text and create a property called name. And then we can do the same sort of down the line. Escalate plans, there we go. And create a new property called source. And then we can get into this, but I don't really want to right now, so we'll just do the ingredients as another proof of concept here. Ingredients. And while I'm thinking about ingredients, actually, sometimes when you're flipping through default and hover states with text properties, you can surprise yourself by having a component revert back to a placeholder state. if the data is not represented in both states. And so I am going to just grab this ingredients list and the property for ingredients and put it in the content for the default card, even though we don't want it to show. So we're going to hide that, make sure that the card itself clips any content outside of its bounds, just so that it's represented in both. When we fill out that ingredients thing, we will have it in both. And the last step would be an image. So let's head back to the internet where I opened the recipe so that we could copy this image and put it right in here. And it's going to be absolutely massive, which is not what we want. So let's shrink this down. We do want it to be pretty zoomed in on this view though. So I'll grab it there. And then we're just going to have this same image in the larger one. We got the fork, looks great. Last step before we test this out is to actually prototype it. So let's go in here and open the prototyping menu and connect these two elements. On hover, we want this to change to the hover state. Smart animate, always nice. We'll just stick with linear for now, just while we're testing it out. And then we'll create a test frame. And we'll put a few instances of our new component in here. And I want to do a couple because I want to see how they behave in a line. And I have a feeling we're going to need to mess around with the constraints and placement a bit here. Because, yeah, everything is going to push to the right where we want it to push to the, or sort of move from the center. So let's, there we go. Now things are moving more in the way that we want. And I will say, it looks a lot like this. Now, if we were to keep playing around with this, I think I'd probably want to figure out the way to get the ingredients to roll up the way they're doing as I hover this. And we would add probably a hover state for the text to be underlined as well, a good affordance for linking there. But I'm pretty satisfied with the basic interaction. And thanks for tuning in while I puzzle that out.